Welcome everybody to the Land Use Committee meeting. Today is the 15th of October, Tuesday, and welcome everybody here in the audience and also at home on Channel 16. We have a fairly full agenda today. First thing on our agenda is approval of the minutes of September 17th, 2013. Could I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
And all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Discussion, our agenda items include two items today and then some open discussion. First, we have some proposed corrections and revisions and additions from the engineering department. And Chad, are you taking that? I will introduce it and then turn it over to somebody who knows, to somebody who's more familiar with it. Yeah, okay.
There we go. All right. Good afternoon. Chad Heavey with the Engineering Division. Two things we want to talk about today. One is the proposed revisions to our engineering design standards. And then we also have some proposed revisions to our general conditions for public improvements. And then we're just going to take a couple minutes to kind of update you on a right-of-way landscaping, vegetation issue that we're working through. Just more to get you familiar with it today. So first of all, the engineering design standards, they are reviewed and revised annually. And city ordinance does require that the city council approves them. These revisions have been approved by the Infrastructure Review and Advisory Board. And today that we're asking your support to take these to the full council on November 12th. Today we have proposed changes to two chapters of the engineering design standards, which is Chapter 9, Sanitary Sewers, and Chapter 10, Water Mains, and then we will discuss general conditions. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Johnson to take you through the changes to the sanitary sewer engineering design standards.
Good afternoon, Ryan Johnson with the Engineering Division of Public Works. I'd like to present just a few changes to Section 9 of the Engineering Design Standards. The first change would be to Section 9487. The first change would be to include a section, or change the title to read manhole covers, manhole external frame seals. Manhole external joint seals would be the piece that was added to that title, and manhole markers. In that section, we would add the requirement to require external frame seals and joint seals on all manholes. Previous to this, external frame seals were not required on all manholes in just our drainage areas. Now they will be required again on all manholes and our joint seals. I have a couple pictures of what they are on the next slide. First, I want to mention we expect the cost of these to be approximately $600 per manhole, assuming an average manhole depth of 8 to 12 feet. We expect the net savings to be recouped in about 5 years just from the reduction of maintenance and rehabilitation cost. So we feel that this is a necessary thing to save cost in the long run. Jump ahead to show what we're looking at. The picture on my left would be the external frame seals. This is where the manhole casting goes to the corbel section on the concrete manholes. Typically, they have a 2 inches to 14 inches worth of concrete adjustment that just has mortar between them. It's generally a point of infiltration. There is no water stop that is implied with the installation of that. The picture on the right is of the external joint seals, and manholes are typically delivered in 4-foot sections. So if you have a 12-foot manhole, you'll have several joints along the way. That they do have rubberized gaskets in there currently from settlement, from deterioration, from several different factors. Those are one of our primary sources of infiltration. To address this, to help support that, we proposed adding external joint seals to these also. Another piece in this section is removing the the reference to fiberglass type manhole markers in our drainage areas. Wherever they're outside of street areas, we try to mark them for easy access and for maintenance. We no longer ask for fiberglass type manhole markers. We use PVC style manhole markers in these areas. So it's a cleanup piece to remove that reference to fiberglass. Those are the only changes I have proposed, and I'd welcome any questions, or would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Councilor Staggers.
Manhole covers. How many manhole covers are we talking about in the city?
Currently, we have over 14,000 structures, manhole structures, in the city of Sioux Falls, and that number grows over 100 annually.
Okay.
Other questions?
If I could just make a comment on the external frame seals and the joint seals. The whole goal is to keep the inflow water, the clean water out of there. You know, the council has spent millions of dollars on replacing our old concrete pipe because it leaked. So the whole goal with wrapping these manholes is to keep clean water out of them, so we're not sending it to the plant and not spending money on treating it. So the whole goal with this is to keep the system tight, so we're not letting clean water in there. So.
Yes, Councilor Karski.
Can you put the picture back up of the manhole cover and the?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to reference on the right the Gator Wrap. Are there a lot of similar products out there? Is our ordinance going to be written? This is my concern. Sometimes our ordinances are written so that there's only one vendor that can provide the product, and we kind of eliminate competition and paint ourselves into a corner. Is this going to be something that more than one vendor can provide a similar product? How are we doing this?
Sure. The external frame seals, there is an ASTM standard, an industry standard that outlines 3 different types of it. We're looking at a type 3. So it has several parameters that they must meet. My initial search, I found 6 different manufacturers for that. The external frame seals, the picture on the left, there's not as many manufacturers, and it's a little bit of a newer technology. So the ASTMs aren't as clear or defined for those pieces. We do have 3 products that from 3 different manufacturers that we've accepted or we've reviewed internally and feel comfortable that we're getting the most benefit from our dollar with that being spent. So,
thank you.
Yes.
Councilor Anderson.
And to move along with that too, with the reference to fiberglass type manhole markers, and you're talking about going to PVC. Mm-hmm. What's the difference as far as cost, life cycle?
Feel comfortable. The life cycle is very similar. The cost for the manhole markers, $20 to $25, very similar to what the fiberglass one was. The fiberglass one is kind of a molded piece of plastic with fiber mesh enforcement. It's flat. It's got a lot of flexibility to it, so it could get run over, and that's fine. But typically, when you're looking at one side of it, you can't see where that marker's at. So if you're looking at something 100 yards away and you're perpendicular to it, you can't find it. The PVC 4-inch diameter, not as flexible, so we don't have the luxury of replacing them as easily, but they have reflective tape on the top 1 foot of it. So you can be shining a flashlight or just have something to really be more visible. Again, several manufacturers manufacture similar products that we accept, and so we just prefer to use the PVC style markers.
But there's not much of a difference between the two then?
Not much of a difference
Just being
at all.
able to locate.
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I have one, Ryan. how are we, it says here, the net savings is less than 5 years from reduced operation, maintenance, rehab cost. Explain that a little bit more, if you would.
Sure. Chad hit on it a little bit. We reviewed several manholes, or several hundred manholes, and found that several of them exhibited leaking, and tried to quantify the cost of that leaking from a treatment standpoint, from a conveyance standpoint, from a rehab standpoint. Carried that leaking cost into a cost, said this is how much it's costing us annually to deal with these issues on these style manholes. We felt we would be able to recapture that cost from those treatment by applying this in as soon as 5 years.
So if I might, the water that what we're doing is with new manhole covers, manholes and manhole covers, we're going to seal them better.
Correct.
That's what it amounts to, so that there's no leakage or less leakage, which costs the water treatment plant, because that water all has to be treated when it comes in there, goes out to the water treatment plant. We shouldn't have as much water going there because of leakage from the manholes. That'll be the savings.
Correct, yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to put it so that I understand it better, and hopefully the people at home, if we do it a little different way, they would understand where that is too. Okay. Continue, please.
Sure. That's all the slides I have to present. Our next presenter will be Jeff Dunn.
Thanks, Bud. Jeff Dunn with City Engineering. I'm the Water Distribution Principal Engineer. This year, what I've done is I've gone through the engineering design standards and tried to make some wholesale changes on deletions to the text that were already covered under the National Fire Prevention Association codes. That would be NFPA 24 and 25. Under Section 1, the general section, what we've done is we moved some unnecessary language about calculating fire flows, locations of firefighting appurtenances such as post indicator valves, locations of fire hydrants relative to buildings as they relate to firefighting operations. These things are reviewed and approved by the Sioux Falls Fire and Rescue Division as part of their plan review process in city engineering. Since it's already in the NFPA codes, I didn't think it was really had a relevant place within the engineering design standards anymore. Also in Section 1, under the general information, I've moved some text language about the locations of water mains relative to buildings to a more appropriate location. And I've also deleted some text defining certain water main types, specifically internally restrained joint pipe around drainage culverts that we found weren't necessary as part of our capital projects. Section 2 deals with fire hydrants. As I stated before, we've made some wholesale changes or deletions to the engineering design standards here because a lot of those that information that's embedded within the design standards is covered through NFPA 24 and 25. As I stated, Dennis Clark and Dean Lanier take a close look at those things as part of their plan review process. And from my standpoint on the engineering side, usually just taking a look at the fire hydrant spacing, where those fire hydrants are located relative to other utilities, and making sure that they're constructed correctly. Item 3, or Section 3 under valves, we had some more information in there on post-indicator valves. Post-indicator valves are valves that are located outside of buildings that have a post on them above the valve that has a glass window that indicates to the firefighters whether or not the valve is open into the sprinkler riser room. There were some references in the engineering design standards about what might be acceptable types of post indicator valves and when they were needed, under what type of building occupancy they were needed. And I felt that since that was already covered in NFPA 24 and 25, that it was taken a look at with Sioux Falls Fire and Rescue's plan review process. On the distribution side, the side that I took a look at or review with my plan review process, just made some text changes as to the locations of water main shutoffs. If we have a single service that runs into a property to serve both the fire line and the domestic line, I wanted to make sure that we had valves located such that each system could be independently operated. By that I mean if the fire sprinkler system had to be taken offline for maintenance, it didn't entail that the domestic had to be taken offline as well. We also had some text in there. Can you back up one, John? We also had some text in there relative to locating gate valves or isolation valves in the distribution system. Previously, we had them located at tangent points on curbing, and I felt it was probably time to take that text out of there because we have to be a little bit lenient on where we put these, or have a little more latitude on the placement of these valves to facilitate future construction and try to minimize some of those valves that aren't really necessary by taking them out of the project. Also deleted some text taking care of, or we revisited our air release valves located throughout the system. Usually we only put those in with our capital projects on 16-inch, 12, 16-inch larger transmission mains. So I would require those for our capital projects, and we rarely see them, if at all, with our private development projects. So I just took that text out of there. We just take care of that on a case-by-case basis. Section 4, under meters, just wanted to clarify that we had some text in there, I think, that indicated that anybody could set a city meter, and that's not the case. That's just city crews doing that. And Section 7, under service lines, I had some text additions on a certain type of polyethylene or plastic water service material that we wanted to make sure we had defined properly, and that would be the PEX tubing. And in addition, under that service line, I wanted to have some language in there that kind of trumped our design standards when it comes to the Uniform Plumbing Code. Sometimes they have some different types of requirements for water services as they run from 5 foot outside of the building up underneath the foundation into the meter. And if they no longer allowed plastic pressure service tubing or PEX service piping, I didn't want that in the engineering design standards. So that's about all I have on Chapter 10.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. Questions? Councilor Staggers.
Yes. It sounded like a lot of your presentation dealt with, you're taking a look at a situation and you're saying, well, we don't really need that, or we need this, or whatever.
Yes.
I guess my understanding was that what you're changing here is dealing mostly just with the city pipes itself and water and not private. Is that fair to say? Or?
No, the majority of it has to do with fire suppression systems as they relate to private development around apartment complexes, around commercial buildings where if I made a comment that may not have met the fire code, then Sioux Falls Fire and Rescue was saying, well, that's really not meeting the fire code. So what I decided was that it would probably be best if just they were taking a look at what was happening on fire sprinkler systems around the buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Anderson.
And that has been my concern as we were going through this. We just spent a lot of time updating our sprinkler ordinance for
Yes.
buildings, and now we're talking about placement of hydrants and things like that. Talking with Dean Lanier, how is this going to affect some of those givebacks that we discussed during the task force for sprinklers?
None at all. None of this affects any of those costs as they relate to having fire services to those buildings. You know, we talked about maximum building heights and water service sizes, but this text never really defined what any of those were to begin with.
When is this going to be brought before the council?
This right here, or what we were talking about with Dean?
Well, the chapter 10, the changes to water mains.
That would be November the 12th.
Have anything? Councilor Karski?
Trying to understand if this says that we're not going to allow private fire hydrants anymore. Is that the intent of some of this? or-
Absolutely not, no. We have every couple of years, we run an audit to locate any new private fire hydrants that they have within the system. We're not asking that they be eliminated. They would be required on any site plan just to meet what requirements are necessary for whether the building is sprinkled or not.
Okay, so private fire hydrants have to meet the standards, so when our firemen get to that private fire hydrant, they know what kind of pressure there is and they can have reasonable expectations.
Reasonable expectation is that it's going to function and it's going to provide them what they need to fight the fire.
Thank you.
Any others? I have a couple. I know that we have the fire marshal here, and I'm assuming that, as you said, that everything is okay along those lines. That was one of the questions I had, that I know they've been working with you and that kind of thing. Just wanted to kind of get that on record. Some of these things with the valves, et cetera, I'm assuming that the old ones are grandfathered in and anything new coming in would be under these standards rather than having to update what was already there?
No, just just moving forward.
Just moving forward.
You know, and a lot of this stuff, I would actually make the comments during the plan review process. So, you know, most of the language is purely antiquated. We have to try to make sure that we're optimizing those valve locations. Whether or not we need to have things just because they're in the standards, you know, we try to follow them, but sometimes we can make arrangements and modifications, and that's what this is allowing me to do.
Good. Back to private fire hydrants. Right now, we don't have as good a system of testing or anything on those that we do on our fire hydrants. Is there anything that we can do to bring that more up to code, I guess would be good, without imposing something onerous on the property owner?
Well, if you'd like, I'd like to discuss how our private fire hydrant flushing program works.
Okay.
In 2010, we did an audit of the system, and we had about 1,000 fire hydrants that we located that were on private property. As part of that process, I asked GIS to provide me with information on the locations and the owners, and what I did was I sent them a letter, each one of them a letter that said, you have a private fire hydrant that needs to be flushed periodically, annually. You can either give the city permission to flush that hydrant, or you can have a contractor flush that hydrant. And from that audit, we had 945 private fire hydrants. 25 of those people elected to have contractors flush, and the remaining portions of those, we had 37 that were not flushed. And since that time, we've had 108 that were added to the system since 2010. And as part of when we do our year-end report, I will send out new letters to all those same customers, the new customers, asking them to grant us permission to flush, or have a contractor come in and flush that. And we give them names of contractors and approximate costs. So I believe we've been very proactive in making sure that these private fire hydrants are functioning and they're ready to go.
But with the numbers you gave me, we haven't hit all of them yet. We're
Well,
trying to hit every
and
one
I
of them in
was-
5 years? That was when?
2010.
So over a 5-year period or so like we do now? You said about a 5-year period? Or no, we do them every year.
Yes, we do them once a year, and I will run another audit this year and make another attempt to get some of these people who don't want to be flushed by city crews, because, you know, we're kind of the experts at making that work. And making
Yeah,
sure
we need to have those, I would think, make sure that they work not only for their safety, but for the people around them and things. One other thing along that line that I was thinking of, and that is, are there any provisions in our building code that says if you're going to put in a private fire hydrant, that they automatically give us authority to go in and flush those and that kind of thing? Or have we thought about that?
I don't recall speaking that directly, no, sir.
Would that be something that maybe should be thought of so that we don't have to go through this and keep adding to private ones that may say, no, I don't want to do anything, you know, that kind of thing?
It makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't that make sense? I can leave it to you guys to maybe bring that to Cotter and his group, or Cooper and his group, and not Cooper? Okay.
It would be Ron Bell, we
Or
could
not-
talk to
yeah,
him
not-
about that.
Yeah, Ron Bell. And, yes, Counselor Anderson.
Can I have Chief Lanier come up, please?
Sure. Chief?
Dean, thank you. Now, when we went through the sprinkler ordinance and everything, private hydrants were something that we did go over. And there was a concern about these private hydrants not having the ability to service our fire department in an emergency.
Dean Lanier, Fire Marshal, Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. Largely, you're right, and the areas that we'd be principally talking about that are most problematic now are areas in which the city has annexed out and grown over the years. Many of those are heritage mains that have been in the ground for a number of years. So with those kind of different moving parts, what we're looking at is trying to constrain that down over the years and slowly but surely make them go away. And I think that in large part has been the strategy of many municipalities that have private hydrant systems where they have annexed into the city.
If I may continue? Okay. And then, per Councilman Rolfing, too, I guess I still have that concern that as we grow as a city and we do annex these, that we don't have any standards for what these hydrants should be producing for water pressure?
No, the standard would be the same. The key issue is flowing them and have they been maintained over time. If a portion of a water system was outside the city limits 30 years ago and it was annexed into the city now, you know, we're really getting a mixed bag of different things. Piping main size, whether the development at the time was even interested in meeting standard fire codes. They could have just put something in the ground just to make ends meet. Over time, what our hope is that we can constrain those down and eventually make them go away. The key thing that with Jeff's amendments to code is making it consistent so that it's not one standard or another or we're having confusion between. Okay. We have a clear standard to go to. It's defined exactly what the main size, what the requirements are for each different appurtenance that's inside the system.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Jeff, could I ask you to come back up? Along that same line, we annex in a development that was a mile out of town 20 years ago, and now they're surrounded. And what is the cost of bringing the water or the fire hydrants and things up to date included in part of the cost that we would assess them when they're brought into it? Or is that with the public fire hydrants, are they just left the way they are and hope they're okay?
I believe the present policy is if we were to annex in a rural subdivision, bring the streets up to code, put in the correctly sized water mains and the right sized or the correctly located fire hydrants, that the property owners would be assessed.
Okay, so that is part of the
Yeah.
rejuvenation, if you will, as being brought into the neighborhood. Just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that.
That's, last time we discussed it, that's what we discussed.
Super.
I guess, no question, but I was going to say, we had a section of rural section out on the T. Ellis Road, and it was 42nd and 46th Street that we were looking at annexing. And they would have to upgrade sewer,
Right.
water, put in curb and gutter and everything, and each property owner was going to be assessed.
Assessed, right. I remember that, and the cost was somewhere around 25 or something like that a piece.
That is correct.
Yeah, and, but I just want to make sure that just because we had a fire hydrant there didn't mean it was the proper kind and it was up to standard, so, super.
And it actually met your description because that area is pretty much surrounded
Yep.
by the city. So, yeah, great example.
Okay, Chad?
All right, now we're going to move on to our general conditions. And these are the conditions that we use for constructing our capital projects. They were last revised in January of 2010. And again, they're only applicable to our city capital projects. When we talk about private construction and private development, those conditions are in the subdivision construction agreement that we implemented a while back. The changes to the general conditions were presented to the Sioux Falls Contractors Association, and we worked with them to discuss these. They do support the changes as you have them today. We also took them to the Infrastructure Review and Advisory Board, and they supported them as well. And then once again, we'll ask for your support today to take these to the full council on November 12th. And so with that, I will turn it over to Brad Ludens, who has led this big effort.
Thank you, Chad. Brad Ludens, Principal Engineer, Engineering Division. As Chad mentioned, we've been took a look at our general conditions for public improvements this year. It's been coming up on 4 years now. And although we don't specifically address these items in the presentation, in addition to what we'll present to you today, we've also gone through the effort to update any spelling errors or grammar or formatting, things like that. We don't specifically address those in this update. But moving right into Section 1, definitions and terms, we corrected the definition that was stated in there for the Federal Aviation Administration. And then we removed qualifying utilities definition and removed reference to qualifying utilities and another definition due to recent change in state law. The state legislature repealed the codified law in regard to qualifying utilities here a couple of years ago. So we felt it was appropriate to remove those from the definitions. Section 2, bidding requirements and conditions. We removed the third paragraph from Section 2.1. The city no longer provides hard copies of the plans, at least on a regular basis, to contractors. And if we do provide hard copies, we certainly don't charge a fee to the contractors for that. That paragraph addresses that. Section 2.3, we removed, we modified the fourth paragraph as far as providing notice to prospective bidders on any addenda items that go out. We will no longer notify contractors via telegram, and we have added the city's e-plan site as a method. The vast majority of our capital projects are all the plans go through our e-plan site.
And you're telling us you think this needs upgrading?
Well,
Telegrams are still viable?
Section 2.5, this was a request from the Contractors Association. They want us to add an exception for using a non-city proposal form as long as it was in compliance with Section 2.4. Section 2.4 talks about certain requirements if they do use a non-city proposal form. They just wanted to have clarification that it was okay to use a non-city proposal form if they felt it necessary. Sections 2.7 and 2.8, we revised language slightly to make the general conditions come into alignment more closely with the instructions to bidders. Didn't modify any of the intent or the meaning of any of those sections. Section 2.10, we added the bid tabulation information that currently is on a standalone page before the table of contents. We felt that it was more appropriate to bring those into the body of the general conditions as opposed to a standalone page. And then section 2.13 talks about excise and use taxes. Also had some references to qualifying utilities. We cleaned that language up and added some text directing questions to the Department of Revenue, and then updated Department of Revenue contact information in that section as well. Section 3, award and execution of the contract. We added the city's website information there to match the instructions to bidders as far as it talks about where the bid tabulations are kept. Section 5, control of work. Section 5.1 talks about the authority of the city engineer. The contractors have always had the option to appeal a decision of the engineer, but we specifically added that appeal language to that section and referenced the proper city ordinance to direct the contractor if he so chooses to go down that road. Section 5.13 talks about weight limits. We revised the city ordinance reference numbers and the name of the ordinance to match the recodification of the city ordinances that recently took place. Section 7, legal specifications and responsibility to the public. Just some minor corrections and updates there. Updated to departments of health instead of boards of health in section 7.6. Section 7.9 removed reference to the City of Sioux Falls Traffic Control Work Area Manual. That document is no longer used by our division as it relates to traffic control. We strictly reference the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or MUTCD. Section 7.10, we cleaned up the references to the Code of Federal Regulations as it relates to the use of explosives and safety on construction sites. Section 7.12, we updated the reference to the South Dakota Workers' Compensation Law instead of the Workers' Compensation Act. Section 7.21 talks about noise control. We updated the city ordinance, or we added the city ordinance reference and revised the times that were listed in the general conditions to match what those times that were stated in the ordinance. Section 722A, we revised and updated the city ordinance reference. Section 723, revised the reference to the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's been updated several times since the original ADA was passed in 1990, so we wanted to make sure that we're up to date with that. Section 8, prosecution and progress of the work. Section 8.8A talks about general or ordinary or usual things that the contractor needs to take into consideration as far as delays as he's ordering materials or things of that nature. We wanted to specifically add that he has to take into account ordinary or normal weather conditions and material lead times. It comes up more often than you would think on projects where they say, well, I'd like to get it done when you want me to, but I can't do it because it's going to take 12 weeks from the manufacturer to get that item, when they maybe could have taken or chosen another manufacturer and gotten it here in time for a different cost. So we wanted to specifically address that. Section 8.8B1, we added some language about adverse weather, and Section 8.8.1 or 8.8B1 talks about normal or usual adverse weather days, and anything above that is a valid reason for a time extension, but we really don't define what an average or usual number of adverse weather days are. We often reference a table developed by the Department of Transportation that they incorporate into their construction contracts that for any given month and for a given area of South Dakota defines what the normal or usual number of adverse weather days are. And we often refer to that anyway as we talk with contractors to develop a reasonable time extension if it comes to that. So we'd like to incorporate that directly into the general conditions if we could. In Section 8.8B2, we'd like to add some language specifically excluding a subcontractor subcontractor's non-performance as a valid reason for a time extension for the general contractor. That section's meant to provide some leniency if a private utility company, say, has to relocate a line in advance of our street project, and you know, the contractor, subcontractor shouldn't be an excuse for a time extension, since the general should have control over his subcontractors. Sections 9.4.h, we'd like to revise the administrative allowance for forced account work on subcontracts over $10,000 from 35% to 3.5%. That was actually something that was brought up by SFCA. Apparently somewhere along the line the decimal point got dropped off there. We'd like to get that put back in there. And then finally, sections 9.8 and 9.12, South Dakota codified law has been revised here in recent years, and we'd like to get those references updated so that we can find those if needed. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Councilor Staggers.
Yes, I was just curious about some wording on one sentence here.
Yes.
It's 2.5, and then item number 5 under that. This is dealing with irregular proposals.
Yes, sir.
Unit bid prices are significantly unbalanced to the detriment of the city.
Yes.
That's rather interesting language.
Yes, and that's existing language that we're not proposing
Yes,
to change.
right,
But
it is.
the intent behind that is if when we're putting the plans together, let's say there happens to be a mistake or a bust in the pipe quantity, and nobody catches it, but this contractor who's bidding on it catches it and says, "Oh wow, they really underestimated the amount of rock excavation or pipe or something that's needed. So I'm going to put, a normal price might be, say, $50 a foot or something like that. And they say, well, I'm going to bid everything else really low, but then I'm going to bid $200 a foot for that particular item, knowing that it's going to overrun. So then I'm going to get a whole bunch of extra payment. So when we evaluate the bid tabulations after a bid opening, that is something that we take a look at, see if compare the bid prices for different contractors to see if everyone's kind of on the same page. Or if you have 3 contractors that bid one unit price on an item, but then another one bids significantly higher or lower, that's kind of sets off alarm bells in our office as far as, well, what's going on there.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Mr. Karski.
A couple questions, if I could. I like the fact under 210, the public opening of proposals, where people want to know who got a bid or what the bids were, et cetera. But I don't think it's real specific enough. If you go to siouxfalls.org, there's got to be 1,000 different points that you can get into from there. Can we make it more specific, either as far as the website goes for people?
Yeah, we talked about that internally, and initially we had the extension or the sub-page, if you will, as far as where that was specifically located. But we thought it would be better just to direct them to the general website, just in case that the address of that particular page changes, and we don't have to go back and.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be overly specific for that very reason,
right,
but
we did
looking under
that.
whatever department at least, so that people have a.
Yeah, we could consider doing that as well.
Yeah,
That's
just a thought.
Thank you. You have one other one?
I do. And I don't see anybody from legal here, do we?
No.
No, okay. Under 712 and 713, being in the insurance industry, I run into certificates of insurance and hold harmless agreements and et cetera. And I'm curious why we don't have the contractors that provide insurance list us as the city as an additional insured for their policy.
I want to say that they do. I think that's addressed in the instructions to bidders. Do you aware of that, Chad?
I didn't see anything in here that said that it addressed a lot, but it didn't address that one thing.
I have a copy of the instructions to bidders here with me. I'm just going to peruse that here real quick, if I may. And we have in the instructions to bidders, we do have specific requirements. you know, it says here the contractor agrees to hold the city harmless from any liability, including additional premium due because of the contractor's failure to maintain the coverage limits required. It doesn't say anything specifically about having the city named as an additional insured. That's certainly something that we could look into if we need to.
I think we should put that past legal to see if there's any reason why we should or should not do that. I see it as a pretty standard thing between even contractors required of their subcontractors that the general be listed on the subs policy as an additional insured. So pretty standard. So if we could check into that, I'd appreciate it.
Yep.
And we do that with a lot of other things in the city also. For instance, if someone is holding an event at Yankton Trails or Harmaden or whatever, they're required to get a certificate that says the city is additionally insured. So this probably is a good idea if you'd look at that before bringing it to council.
Good catch, Councilman.
Yep. Councilor Anderson.
Back to 2.5 on the irregular proposals. You know, the city's all about uniformity. Why would we accept anything other than a city proposal, a city approved proposal as far as, you know, a form that's furnished by the city?
Right. The proposal forms that are provided by the city are typically a PDF document where we have the bid items listed, and then we have spaces provided for the unit bid price and then the extension based on the unit bid price times the quantity of that particular item. What that section 2.4 allows, if the contractor so chooses, as long as it meets certain standards, he can create an Excel spreadsheet, for example, that he could enter in the quantities of the specific items and enter in unit bid price, and then create a formula to automatically extend that to reduce some labor on his end. I know a lot of contractors have bidding software that they use, but a lot of them do end up just transferring it by hand back onto the city-provided form just so they don't miss something. But we do allow that for certain cases.
Okay, thank you.
That does put some more work on you, though, to make sure that they haven't missed what you're doing. And so, you know, whether that's good or bad, I can see it's a nice thing to do for the contractors. And I can see that point, too, where they would have that bidding software and be able to just see attached and go with it that way. Just as long as you don't get a whole bunch of but you have the right in that situation to deny that, too, and to say this is not in compliance, and so it wouldn't be accepted.
Right, yeah. Section 2.4 addresses some of the specifics as to what's required if the contractor chooses to use a non-standard form. But then if there are any discrepancies, the unit bid price would govern in those instances if we choose to move forward with that contractor's bid.
Thank you, Brad. Well done. Any other questions? Chad, you gonna wrap up?
Well, I want to add one comment. You know, with the new financial software that the city has purchased and is in the process of implementing, we may be able to, in the near future, go to more of online bidding.
Yep.
So, you know, that would certainly make us more efficient when it comes to standard forms and checking and everything like that. So if there are no more questions, I would ask for your support to take this to both the revisions to the engineering design standards and the revisions to the general conditions to the full council on November 12th.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So move, Anderson.
Okay.
Second.
Second from Karski. Any other discussion then on this?
We had a few
Any discussion from the audience? Excuse me. Okay, yes.
Sorry, would those be coming as two separate items or as one item?
It's a very good question.
Make it 5 items.
Would it be best to do it separately, just in case they are separately?
Probably not a bad idea, I would think. Or, yeah.
Just in case something's not ready for one or something, you're not holding up everything that, you know.
I think we should. I'd rather have us bring them as separate resolutions.
Okay, let it reflect then the motion that they would be separate resolutions.
Just
Yes.
We had a few open questions here. How will you be getting back to us on those?
We can either, we could certainly send you a memo,
That would be fine. I'd be okay with an email.
and we'll get that to you before we would come on November 12th,
Thank you.
if that would be the best way to communicate.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good. Okay, we have a motion in front of us. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then we do have, I just want to briefly touch on one other item that we're dealing with, and Shannon Verhey will take you through a few slides of right-of-way issues.
Good afternoon. Shannon Verhey from the Engineering Division. And I'm here just to introduce 3 topics to you tonight or this afternoon related to right-of-way regulation. And ultimately, the goal is just to introduce them to you here tonight, and then in a few months, we'd like to bring back some more formal recommendations to this committee. And the 3 things I'm going to talk about tonight are right-of-way landscaping, encroachments in the right-of-way, and mailboxes. And with that, just kind of a little background. When we're talking about our right-of-way, we're talking about the area generally from the back of the sidewalk to the back of the sidewalk and everything in between there. So the street, the boulevards, and the sidewalk is all encompassing our right-of-way. Typically, our right-of-way has, it's used for the public's benefit. You know, it's for transportation. It's a corridor for our private and public utilities, as well as a corridor for pedestrian travel. So the first topic I want to talk about tonight is right-of-way landscaping. And our existing ordinance that we have limits the right-of-way landscaping to sod, seed, or other living ground cover. So that upper left picture is what we would like to see in our right-of-way. Nice green boulevard. In the lower left is something that we have hundreds of, if you want to say, violations of city ordinance throughout the city. Actually, rock is shown here on the boulevard, and that's actually specifically prohibited as part of our ordinance. And again, we have hundreds of violations of this throughout the city. And then moving to the upper right picture here, you know, I think any of us can drive through the city and see examples of this where we have some rock around mailboxes and whatnot. And actually, this is ultimately where the engineering division would like to take this is there some sort of in-between here where, you know, do we allow some sort of rock in the boulevard in a limited setting? And then on the bottom right, it's just a picture of, I like to refer to those as splash guards. On some of our high-volume streets, especially during snow removal operations, it can be difficult to maintain a small boulevard there with some of the chemicals and stuff that are put down. It does make the keeping grass growing a challenge. So we thought we would clarify some of the options for the public as far as maybe on those high-volume streets more formally allow splash guards like concrete infill, like I'm showing here. So that's just that's kind of a quick overview of part of the right-of-way landscaping. The other part of right-of-way landscaping that we want to talk about, right now we have a little bit of a disconnect between the nuisance and right-of-way, or between the nuisance vegetation ordinance and the right-of-way vegetation ordinance. And as you can see by the photos there, on the left side and on the upper right side is some of the vegetation that is in our right-of-way. Creates some different hazards for people, especially near intersections where we have sight distance issues. You can also have large bushes on either sides of driveways that create some sight distance issues. And then the bottom right picture, that's just a picture of, again, where somebody has utilized rock and plants and tried to enhance their boulevard in that respect. So again, kind of an overview of the right-of-way landscaping. We'd like to make some modifications to the ordinance that would maybe clarify what can be done there, as well as clarify what kind of vegetation that would be allowed in the right-of-way there. The other topic, encroachment and mailboxes, and I'd actually kind of like to split that into two different topics. First, I want to talk about encroachments and basically what's an encroachment. An encroachment is just any object in the right-of-way that could affect the safety of the public that's utilizing that right-of-way. And on the left side, I'll say the left two photos, the uppermost left and the bottom left, are examples of what we would classify as an encroachment. On the upper left case, somebody wants to use the boulevard or as a basketball hoop playground for the children. Bottom left there, somebody, you can see the trucks maybe cut the corner there, and this property owner decided to put some very large boulders in the right-of-way. And the challenge that we have with encroachments is there is no city ordinance specifically prohibiting them. We actually have to revert back to state law. So it's a very difficult enforcement process. If normally we just try to administratively either send them a letter or call them and trying to get them to comply, but if they don't, again, we have to go through more of the through the state codified law process. So one thing that what our recommendation would be here is that we create an ordinance that actually specifically prohibits encroachments in the right-of-way and addresses that. Now onto the other area, mailboxes. Technically, mailboxes are an encroachment, but I want to kind of put that off to the side as a whole different, it's a whole different topic. Currently, we do not have any regulations dictating the size, the placement, or the type of construction for mailboxes. And we have a lot of, most people have standard type mailboxes, wood posts, meeting United States Postal Service guidelines. But we also have a lot of mailboxes out there similar to the upper right that are made of brick structures, and they're actually located in the right-of-way. And it's one of the challenges that we have for several reasons. Do these create a hazard in a right-of-way? You have a large immobile object right back of the curb. Typically our right-of-way, most of the objects in it, like our signs, our traffic signals, our light poles, all have breakaway bases. So if a car hits them, they shear off, per se. Where we have cases like these with these mailboxes that, if a car hits them, could we endanger the public? The other thing is occasionally snow removal. The snow plows can hit them and stuff. Then the city is left either reimbursing or paying the landowner to replace that mailbox. Not a huge issue with that, but there are some cases of that where we are damaging those during snow removal operations. So one thing that we would like to consider here is aligning or creating, or I'll say outlining the requirements for mailbox installation that would mimic the United States Postal Service guidelines. So with that, that's just a real brief introduction to the topics we'll be discussing here. Some of the stuff that some of the items that we would like to do next is we would like to work with our Infrastructure Review and Advisory Board, create a committee, actually kind of vet through all the different requirements, ordinance changes, et cetera. We want to involve developers, the utility companies who are obviously some of our stakeholders, as well as the post office and the public. So with that, I'll entertain questions.
Councilor Anderson?
Just a statement. I think once they get these revisions done, I would like to see this come back to this
Yes.
board, this group here, and then we can further discuss this, because there's a lot of issues
Oh,
here.
yeah, there's a lot of issues here. I kind of like those rocks there. I think that's I might have done that myself if that was my piece of property. But I understand the reasons why we sometimes don't need that either. Did you have a question?
I do. Where are we on enforcement of some of these things right now? Can you help me out? People calling up, they got rocks in the boulevard, neighbor against neighbor.
I think you were involved maybe a year ago.
Yes.
on where we did take enforcement. And typically what happens is the only way that we know this is going on is if a staff member drives by and says, oh, it looks like there's a load of rock in the street, there's a boulevard that's empty. So then we notify them, and usually it works out okay. The problem is that they don't have to notify us beforehand or get a permit or anything like that. And so when we have taken enforcement, then we are given a list of 100 or 200 locations where they are in direct violation of the ordinance, and thus we're at this.
Can't do anything.
Thus where it's really come to a head here. And so I worked with David Fifley when this issue came up, and we talked about how to proceed, and we I'll say have really stepped back from enforcing this just because of the issue that we're dealing with every day. And so if we're out and we see somebody who's going to put rock in their boulevard, we give them a brochure, we have them call us, we work with them to try to tell them that it's, against city ordinance. But, that'll be another topic when this gets brought back here is, how do you deal with the hundreds of properties that already have them? The rocks look okay when they're first put in. They get into the street, that's an issue. But if, just like with grass, it's got to be maintained or it just turns into basically a weed infested area. And so these are kind of things that are, nobody really thinks about, but something that we deal with every day. And so, and we have had luck on encroachments. When we use federal dollars, that's part of the federal process. If there's an encroachment, it's got to go. So we work with people, a lot on all of these issues daily. So.
Yep. Okay, we will look for you to come back to us about when, do you know?
Several months. This is a good winter topic to discuss. So.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you for your time today.
On our agenda, we'll have it on our little sheet that says you are coming back with this. I think it's a good thing for you to do. I think it's needed. But again, be gentle as you go because it's
a touchy subject.
Touchy subject, right? Right.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff. Public Works can get up and leave now.
Chair, I am going to have to leave at 6 o'clock. I have another meeting that I have to attend.
Okay. You got 4 minutes, Jeff.
Kenny wanted to hear this too. This is an informational item. The WH Lions Fairgrounds is a great amenity to the City of Sioux Falls. The Minnehaha County owns the fairgrounds. It's operated by a board and a manager. Scott Wick is here today to present this information. Back in April 2011, the mayor asked me to be a liaison to the fair, and so that's why I'm here. And this is just an informational item once a year. Last October I came, this October I'm coming just to give you some information and see if you have any questions for us. That's all it really is. We have a cooperative process between the city and the fairgrounds. And last year in 2002, in 2012, we signed a memorandum of understanding so that makes sure that we're communicating and working together. And then at the same time, on an annual basis, we sign written agreements to make sure everybody knows what they're doing. Previous to that, before Scott and I's times, it was a even loosely gentleman's agreement. Hey, why don't you do this? How about you do that? Now there's written agreements on what we're doing and when we're doing, and it works out very well. Scott can go in a lot more details, but just the fantastic cooperation that we have out there works very well, and I wanted to make sure you understood that. So with that, I'll turn you over to Scott Wick. And if Kenny has any comments before he has to leave.
Thank you.
Scott Wick, CEO of the Sioux Empire Fair Association. Entertain any questions or open up by saying we appreciate the partnership that we do have. When we first took over out there, Jeff and I got together and talked about the many different things that the city does out there, from the motorcycle training to the police car training, cadet training. Every now and then we'll get the K-9 unit will call up and say, hey, can we come out there and use one of your many buildings to train the dogs? And we've always been there to say, go ahead and do that. And we do very much appreciate some of the things that have been coming back to us in the form of asphalting and other additional items that help us throughout the year with the street sweeping and different things that are done to help us prepare for different events. We were there, got the call on a Sunday for before it was timber strike, and I just said, just start dumping trees. We'll talk about it later on, but start cleaning the city up. So we were there to help out with that, and like I said, we're just very pleased with the partnership we have so far and the continued support, and look forward to the future.
Okay. Councilor Anderson.
I want to say this is something that I have followed very closely over the last couple of years, especially after the issues that they had at the fairgrounds. And I feel that under Mr. Wick and under Joe's leadership out there, I think that you see amazing accomplishments happening. Just recently, they just changed the air system in the expo building, really changing that whole atmosphere in there. Now the county is actually looking at doing some capital things out there in a larger scale. I feel that, you know, we always think of the Sioux Empire Fairgrounds and just think of the Sioux Empire Fair. But this property here is a great partner to the city. The city utilizes that for many different things. Our firemen, our policemen utilize that for training. During timber strike, their property was allotted to use to put tons of wood products, and they spent months grinding that down in that north parking lot. I feel that this is a great partnership. It's one that does generate thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in sales tax revenue for the city, and that's a small give back that we do at this time. And I hope that after the full presentation that you'll feel the same way I do about that land. It's just a jewel for Sioux Falls. So thank you.
Councilor Karski.
Along the same lines, Councilor Anderson, what year does it go back that the fairgrounds were deeded to the county? I mean, that it goes back to the 30s?
I believe it was 1938.
38?
Was
And I
the
know
first-
at the time
the first
that,
deed.
well, obviously that was way out of town. I mean, 1938. And there was a lot of provisions put on that land coming over to the county that the city couldn't get involved in it. Now it's in the middle of the city for all practical intents. And based on echoing what Councilor Anderson said, that we do benefit greatly from it right here in this community. And I would never advocate, nor would I even suggest that the city have any operating or ownership in that, but it would be very nice to maybe partner a little bit more with the with you to make sure that it does stay the jewel that it is and continues to be that way. So
We would look forward to that dialogue. One thing, we did complete our economic impact study, and Terry Schmidt and her group put the formulation to all those numbers. And for calendar year 2012, her numbers came in at about 23 million for the economic impact from that property. Obviously, the fair being the number one, the largest. Secondary to that would be the farm show. But we are more than just the 10-day now fair. I mean, we have events going on every weekend.
there is a sunset on that provision, I believe. How long does that go until the city can become maybe a better partner with you? Do we know?
I don't believe, can you address that?
I think the sunset you're referring to is when it could go away from the county property.
Yeah,
So-
without a deeding back to the
Correct,
county, correct?
right. And then, so then it's back to the Sioux Empire Fair responsibility, and that still, I think, had 2 or 3 more years in
Well,
that original Lions contract.
Yeah, well, there's some discussion and some thought process out there from some parties involved that after 75 years, that any of the obligations from the Lion family go away and it's 100% the county's property. So whether that is challenged or not, I don't know. There's never been any, there isn't any cases on that where people really know of that perpetual usage. So for now, we're just plugging along, day-to-day business, and next year's our 75th annual.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add, Counselor, anything? Okay. I'd like to add, everything that I hear is very positive about Sioux Empire Fair and the job that you two have done running it since the unfortunate experience that you had. And so I just say keep up the good work, and what we can do to help you, if at all possible. I'm sure that the council and administration is working hard on that also. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Open discussion. Is there anything else for open discussion? Now I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And the second?
Second.
Meeting adjourned.